Thank you for auditing the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor who's catching up on some albums that he missed last year. Now, the rapper from Brownsville, Brooklyn, Ka, did release 2 albums in September, and I reviewed just one of them, Languish Arts. I told my viewers, if 5,000 of you watch the video, I would review Woeful Studies. Well, it's only reached 3,500, but I don't care. I want to talk about this album mainly because I just realized something listening to this album. Ka is a top MC. Not good, not one of the better rappers out there, but like truly, in the parlance of our days, an S-tier MC. And I'm saying that, and probably most of you who are watching are already Ka fans, and you can type in the comments, we knew that Sky, but I didn't know. Okay, I just didn't know. This is my 3rd review of his, and I finally get it. And the thing is, his style is so subtle, his delivery is so muted, that it's sometimes easy just to listen and just sort of be in a zone, not like actually, really focused on what he's doing. But what I've come to realize from reviewing this album is he really is top tier. Like, there's equals, but not people who surpass him. That's how good he is. So that's pretty special, I don't say that about every rapper that I like, and I just came to realize that that's true. Now, the tricky thing is that this is, the second album or the first album, whatever it is, it's part of a 2-part album. And I chose the other one. I probably still prefer Languish Arts to this, but maybe I'm just more familiar with it. But, it's not really 2 albums. It's just 1 album. It's so unified in its theme and its musical soundscape. It's not even 1 album. It's 1 song. And usually that's an insult, right? I used to insult AC/DC, being like, AC/DC only has 1 song, but I like that song. It's not an insult, though. This album is so unbelievably unified that it just sets this tone lyrically and musically, and just rides it for both sides of this 2-part album. There's this one atmosphere, which is best defined by the sound of a plucked acoustic guitar. Very little drums. If there's any drums, it might be someone playing on the rim of a snare, or maybe just, hitting a ride cymbal at the beginning of every bar. Like, the beats, they don't really develop. It's just like this atmosphere. And most of the spectacular, the remarkable stuff is just a little bit of flute. Like, I don't know if Ka has a couple friends who play flute and guitar and he just records them, or if he's somehow finding these loops from somewhere. I can't quite figure out what it is. But it just really creates this one atmosphere that is the perfect bed for the main theme. The theme, I believe, is of growing up in a time of benign neglect. The last video that I did was this hip-hop course that I'm creating. And in that, I'm explaining the situations, the social context that birthed hip-hop. Hip-hop was born in the South Bronx in the mid-'70s, and at that point, the South Bronx in the mid-'70s was literally synonymous with poverty and misery, especially the poverty and misery of Hispanic and African Americans. Okay, it was synonymous with that. And out of that came this amazing art. There was a senator, okay, a New York senator. Now, it is a funny fact that both Ka and I are paid by the same people. We're both employees of New York State. So here I am going to be saying some bad things about another employee of the New York State, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who did some good things. He's a Democrat. Not all racists are Republican. Who had this theory, the inner cities, the white flight, the tax problems. Let's just do nothing. That was his idea. That was his stated idea. He called it benign neglect. Now, benign neglect is such a nefarious term because it's an oxymoron, like a jumbo shrimp, okay? It's benign, meaning harmless, and neglect, meaning a harmful ignoring of something. So this was his entire theory. And you saw the results of benign neglect in the South Bronx, in South Central Los Angeles, all over the country. throughout the 70s and throughout Reagan's 80s, in which point the rich got richer, the poor got poorer, and was always this idea of benign neglect. Just let them fail. Never mind that the reason that they fail is from centuries and then decades and then years of abuse, mismanagement, enslavement, segregation, all that. Just, I'm going to benignly neglect. So the world that Ka puts us into is in that world. And it's important that both of these albums are in the context of schools. The album covers are just abandoned or semi-abandoned classrooms. It's representative of these failing social services. Because what happened in the 70s and in the 80s in New York and all over the country is when there were financial problems, the first thing to get cut would be social services. Social services that benefited the poor. Whether that be welfare, whether that be housing, whether that be after-school services, whether that be the schools themselves. So this album is a little bit about like what he learned growing up in the 70s and 80s. The ignorance that was forced upon him and his people through these decrepit schools. Through this benign neglect, the forced ignorance of benign neglect. I think that's what this album is about. And it's interesting because it's in this very dark, murky, grimy, and realist lens. It reminds me of something. When we talk about American popular culture, there's sort of a truism, which happens to be mostly true, that before Jaws in 1975, and before Star Wars in 1977, movies were made for adults. There were some children's movies, but in general, the target audience was for adults. That the movies of the 70s were darker, were grimier, were more authentic, were more real. Human emotions being lived by humans as they live. Okay? The common wisdom is that with the rise of the blockbuster, those started to go away. And we're now seeing the fruits of that with all the comic book movies where we're so drenched in escapism that we have abandoned realism. And what realism does is it presents us life as it is. It forces us to confront the difficulties of life, especially difficulties of life as lived by those in the lower stratums of our society. So it's interesting because this album to me feels very 70s. Like that one atmosphere I'm talking about, the guitar and the flute, it almost sounds like it could be a soundtrack to... This is what I imagine. I imagine a man sitting alone on a bed in a dingy apartment. Maybe like a black and white TV, like at the edge of the bed. Kind of like Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver. I imagine him having like maybe some dirty dishes on a counter and like a window. But the view from the window is just bricks from the building next to him. And I picture this music with this flute and with this guitar playing. I imagine there being a loud family next door, maybe like 5 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment. I imagine dogs barking in the distance. I imagine sirens. I imagine this bleak world. That's very much the world of a lot of 70s cinema. And that's the world that he plunges us into. But there's an added element to it. That is this 70s atmosphere. Also, the 70s for black militants. So the 60s was an amazing time, the civil rights movement, the rise of a lot of great civil rights activists and speakers. But the 70s and 80s were a time of disillusionment. I mean, mostly the FBI successfully infiltrated and destroyed most of the revolutionary movements, or even just all the movements altogether. And there's this sort of sense that you get when you read or when you listen to activists in the 70s and 80s when talking about issues of race and inequality in America, just a sense of being tired, worn down, resigned. Like, the war is over, we won some battles, but we lost the war. That it just didn't work. So when I'm imagining the feeling this album gives me, I imagine somebody maybe who even works in a school, who maybe sees it failing, lives in, let's say, Brownsville, Brooklyn, in the 1970s or early 80s, and goes home to his apartment and just sits there and describes the world that he sees, the world that has been given to him and given to the children that he is caring for. These woeful studies, these languishing arts, that the system failed. The system failed to help these people, and the people who were trying to change the system were defeated, and they failed. But it was more that they were defeated than that they failed, right? It wasn't a fair playing ground. So that's the world that he presents to us. And I think it's important, and somewhat ironic too, because the world that he's describing to me makes me feel like I am witnessing someone talking about New York City in the 70s and 80s. But of course, that's where hip-hop came from, was the New York in the 70s and 80s. But what was hip-hop like in the 70s? It was all a party. It was all breakbeats. It was all, Apache, the Mexican. Give it up and turn it loose, Clap your hands, stomp your feet. It's all that kind of joyousness because it was escapism, because people needed to escape. There were 30,000 fires in the Bronx between 1973 and 1977. 30,000 fires. 30,000 fires. Hip-hop was created in a place where there were 30,000 fires in 4 years. 30,000. I'm going to keep saying it until you go, damn, Sky, that's a lot of fires. Put that in the comments. Okay? That's what birthed this art. But how do we describe what actually happened in those times? We need to. Hip-hop has a goal. Hip-hop, 1982, that's where we have the message. That's where we have the idea that hip-hop could be political, thanks to the words of Duke Booty, who wrote most of the song, Melly Mel, who wrote the final verse, and Grandmaster Flash, who did nothing on the song. Congratulations, you at home. You have done as much in writing the song The Message as Grandmaster Flash. Royalties checks are coming soon. Still, that was with that song, we got the sense of what hip-hop could do, but as we know, hip-hop has a bizarre relationship with realism. It's usually in the world of fantasy. Nobody wants to make the Joker, they all want to make Iron Man, okay? Every rapper wants to be Iron Man, and this album is the Joker. This is showing the social system's failing and describing its consequences. Now, on top of all that, he is a spectacular rhyme constructor. He has a complete mastery over his voice and his cadence. It's not my favorite voice and cadence, okay? It's not like kind of rapper where I hear it, I'm like, I could just listen to that all the time. It's not my favorite voice, but he knows how to use his voice, this resigned sound. His breath control. I mentioned it before on my last review of him, where he has this ability to breathe out with his nose, which very few people do, and really reminds me of De Niro. And I think he reminds me a lot of De Niro, and I mentioned that before, just in his mastery of subtlety. And then when you actually pay attention, because he delivers his rhymes so casually, you think it's effortless, as in without effort. But surprise, there's so much work, so many rich internal rhymes, so many bizarre and beautiful references, including one that is in frame right now. Do you catch the reference that's in this album, that is in the frame right now? If you do, congratulations. You had as much fun as I did. Before I get going, I'm going to make a plea that you smash the like bucket. I recorded this entire video, 48 minutes. And for some reason, the audio was this. And then I'd go quiet. Very, very frustrating. So please just throw me a like and subscribe. January is a tough month for YouTubers. So don't just watch me and go watch a random Fantano video, a random CJ the X video, a random Sean C video, and just give likes. Just start watching some YouTube. Just throw around likes and comments. It's tough for us out here. All of our numbers are like... Anyways, that's my little pitch there. My wife laughed because, I have a baby upstairs, and she loves listening to white noise. That's her favorite thing. Well, you finally made a video that our daughter likes. All right, now let me get into a little review of the album. Now I've made my pitch. I'm going to give you my stamp. That's my example song from the album. And whenever possible, I like to have the example song be the first track. it works very well here with the song We're Not Innocent. Click above the banana, above Eric and Parish making dollars, for the song We Not Innocent. Now, this is a very typical song. It starts off with a intriguing, mysterious audio quote. I have found the audio quotes, like where they come from, for a couple of the tracks on this album, but for most of them I have not. I looked them up. I have different strategies for finding these things. I couldn't find this. Someone referring themselves to be a sort of a griot. It sounds like it could be Gil Scott-Heron, but I don't know. Maybe it just sounds like any number of like influential civil rights orators of the early 70s. There's like a certain tone in the voice. Like I don't think people sound like this guy sounds anymore. Anyways. Griot's a very interesting, that's like a public speaker, a sort of oral performer of the African tradition. There's been a sort of long debate about whether or not hip-hop is just a continuation of the griots or if it's not. Recently there's a book called Breakbeats in the Bronx by a guy named Iwudzi, where he sort of makes the argument that that's not an accurate, that it's not actually just the new griots. So it's an interesting debate. I'm not going to discuss it now, but it is an interesting debate. Because unfortunately, whatever culture there was in Africa was severely truncated when it came here to America by the slave masters who wanted to make sure there was no continuity of culture. So, it doesn't matter. But, the atmosphere of the album, we have this kind of vague not civil rightsy, but militant-ish quote, and then this atmosphere, guitar, flutes, so a snare being played on the rim. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then these beautiful opening lines. Bill of health, real wealth, don't fit in wallets. Amazing. Bill of health, real health, wealth, don't fit in wallets. A lot of this album is about what really matters. That when you grow up with nothing, you are trained by people who have everything. That your key to happiness is to get something. Okay? So, if you're poor, the rich will tell you to get rich and then you'll be happy. And that keeps you fighting, that keeps you hungry, and that keeps you ignoring the real sources of happiness. The real sources of happiness, which of course are sort of being healthy, Bill of Health. There's no greater luxury than health. If you offered me $10 billion or a guarantee that I would live until 80 years old without any major health scare, I would take the health. I hope you would too. The only real wealth. So, Bill of health, real wealth, don't fit in wallets. Great internal rhyme there. There's not a message less it's been acknowledged. Beautiful construction here. Instead of saying unless, he's saying less. So, not a message less it's been acknowledged. Interior rhyme, health, wealth, mess, less. Wallets acknowledged. A beautiful slant rhyme. I'm getting into rhymes lately since I did that video and I read Adam Bradley's great book about different kinds of rhymes. So, these words don't actually rhyme. Wallets acknowledged. But the way he pronounces it makes it rhyme, and it's this beautiful idea. And it's the other theme that falls throughout this album is he's trying to figure out, is anybody listening? Is his artistic output important? Is he reaching people or not? Because if he's making all these great points, and he's being this wonderful civil, again, militant, he's really militant, being a great black militant, is anybody listening? Or is it just suburban white guys like me, okay? Is he submitting to the same problem that a lot of other great African-American artists have experienced throughout their life, where their audience is not the people who need to hear it, but the people whose ancestors created the material conditions that led to the creation of the music in the first place? And I'm including myself, okay? 400 years of shame in my past. Just life. Just life, bro. That's how you're born. I was born into this scam. I was born into this heritage, and that is my heritage. So he's worried that he is not being acknowledged, that the message is not being acknowledged. But I think it is. A very clever chorus. He does this thing where his choruses are very clever and they're very simple. And I think it's on purpose, because the image that came up in my first version of this damn video is like, It's like his words are like the rapids, like you're going down this, like you're just bathed in all these subtly delivered words, and you're just trying not to hit rocks, and you're moving around. And then his choruses are like a branch hanging off the bank of the river, and you just hold on to them. And just for a second, there's just something kind of simple. You don't have to like follow the next line and follow the next line. We ain't innocent, we into dollars. Like, okay, he says that a couple times. It's not an easy to understand line, but I can kind of get it. And then you let go and you go back down the river with the next verse. Do you see my image there? Smash that like bucket again in case you like that. And it's funny and it's interesting, because it's a play on words. Innocent, we into dollars, so cents and dollars. But it's much more profound. There is a real Marxist, communist, socialist undercurrent to this entire album, which is positing that really what we're talking about is class warfare being waged on the poor by the rich, and this whole idea that they are not innocent because they're into dollars. It's their greed that makes them not innocent. It's their desire to get money, the corruption of money. But as he explains throughout the rest of the album, this greed is actually driven by a hunger. It's driven by inequality. During the chorus, the beat changes ever so slightly. It's one of the things about his style. He produces most of his own beats, and they're not. They are a bed. They are a bed for his words and for his style. They're not like they're to create an atmosphere, to create a zone of feeling, not so much to be like do 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 do. Right? That was Slam, by the way, by Onyx. I have Onyx in my head for some reason. And then the song ends with "Can't chill hearing children's screams, years no feelings made us feel things." So again, very visceral. This is why I have that image of this album as being a guy sitting on the edge of his bed and the screams. Like, you can't chill hearing children's screams, years no feelings made us feel things. Years no feelings made us feel things. So this is about the way particularly black men, but in general, African Americans are encouraged by society, by power structures, not to be in touch with their feelings, to reject their feelings, to be stoic, to withstand pain. Okay, this is well acknowledged. I'm not saying it, the data says it, okay? To the point where doctors literally treat white pain more seriously than black pain. This isn't like fancy poetics. This is hard data supports this fact. Good doctors, bad doctors, all doctors just think that black people can withstand and should withstand more pain because of slavery. That's why. It goes back to slavery. That's why. So, anyways, that's the world that we're living in here. And not just physical pain, but definitely emotional pain. And the trauma of the Bronx, of Brooklyn, of New York, of the inner city in America, of the impoverished people all over the world, and an increasingly divided society with more wealth concentrated at the top and more poverty and misery concentrated at the bottom. Years no feelings made us feel things. So that's fascinating. The idea that like he feels something that comes from years of not feeling. And it's maybe part of the strength of his delivery is that he has that distanced feeling from everything. Okay, next song is We Hurting. Kind of a weird bluesy gospel song. Like, it sounds like a blues song, but has kind of a gospel call and response. Gonna buy me a pistol just as long as I am tall. There's a weird history to this lyric. This lyric is best known in a song from 1928 by someone named Jimmy Rogers, who I think is from Kentucky. It's a white guy, a white country blues guy. A song called T for Texas. Beautiful song. It doesn't matter what race you are, how old you are. Listen to the song T for Texas. It's an amazing song, okay? Now, he didn't write these lyrics. He didn't write any lyrics in this song. All blues artists at this point, white, black, whatever, they just stole everything. They just heard someone sing a song and then they put that in their song. They had a different conception of ownership and copyright. One could argue better. So he probably stole these lines from Ma Rainey. But still, it's interesting to have this long heritage of this. And it made me realize this album is the blues. That's what this is. Like, what the blues used to be able to do was, especially Chicago blues, was describe the life of the urban black poor. The downtrodden, mistreated, tired, hurting, wronged people of Chicago or Mississippi. Didn't really matter, but that's what the blues was able to be. Now, what the blues has become is kind of a weird, unfortunate thing. And it's funny because, there's rap albums that try to be soul. There's rap albums that try to be disco. There's rap albums that try to be funk. There's rap albums that try to be rock. But there's never been a rap album that really tries to be blues. I think it's because the music of the blues isn't that interesting. It used to be, but the same basic chord structure over and over again, not that interesting. But emotionally and spiritually, this album feels like it's the blues. Now, this beat is a little bit unnerving to me because it's different. And it's produced by someone named Animos, so it's different. It's a great beat. It's got these great 4 clicks in the back, crescendo with these cymbals, but it doesn't quite fit the theme of the rest of the album atmospherically, but still. It's maybe the best beat on the album, but it also doesn't fit. Speaking of doesn't fit, the first lines of this album was headed to be a predicate, tired of being a subject. Hey, why wasn't this on the language arts bit? Because, language arts is a play on language arts, and this is a language joke, or language punchline. Predicate, subject. In a sentence, I drink the coffee. I am the subject. Drink is the verb. The coffee, is the direct object, is a predicate. A predicate is the thing that the verb is done to, is the thing where the subject does the action, the predicate is acted upon. So in general, in life, we want to be the subject. That's our goal, to be the one who does the thing. Not to be the object of the sentence, but to be the subject of the sentence. I am the story. I am the hero. But here, he says he wants the opposite. Again, fatigue, hurt, constant on this album, was headed to be a predicate tired of being the subject. He wants to be the coffee, not the person drinking the coffee. You want the lines inane of what minds contain, you choose. Again, this general theory that he's despondent, that people do not want what he is giving them. They want inane rhymes as instead. My writing goal is for every scroll to become an old adage. Since the visit is strictly business, is the sermon for the parish. So again, this going on and on with this idea of what's the purpose of his writing. He wants his writing to be important, but he's wondering, is it a sermon for the parish? Like, is he preaching to the choir, or is he reaching out to new people? Because the problem is that rap is, at this point, largely strictly business. Did you get this right? EPMD, Eric Sermon, and Marcus Parish? What is Parish's first name? It's not going to say it here. I'm a customer. Anyways, what? No, Marcus Parish is one of my viewers. Damn it. Whatever. Tell me in the comments, what is Parish's real first name? But EPMD, Eric and Parish Making Dollars, one of the best and truly most overlooked rap groups from the 1980s. They produce all of their own material. Okay, they produce all of it. And they have great rhymes, great raps, and all their albums are great. Even their solo albums, even Eric Sermon's solo album, super overlooked. So this idea of strictly business, their most famous album, is this a sermon for the parish, using both names? That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. Like you're floating down the river and you're like trying to keep everything together with all these amazing and interesting references here. Embarrassed as kids, we had patches in our clothes, we wanted cabbage. Again, this idea of desperation. They want cabbage, meaning money, so they want money, but they're hurting. Even the blind can see these signs are hurting. I'm done with getting draped, I'm trying to see behind the curtain. That's why I'm thinking of Onyx, because I'm thinking of that line, they leave us with drapes. I'm done with getting draped. I assume that means like draped over with a like at a corners, or of just being fooled. I want to see behind the curtain. That's why I don't like performing these songs, because every line hurts. Again, I gotta stop saying again. I'm sorry. I say that too much. And I don't say like, I don't say but because I don't edit my videos, I don't notice the things I say too much. Now I'm noticing I say again too much, so I'm in trouble. Now I'm gonna be up in my head. He's really emphasizing his vulnerability here. that what he's talking about is so true and so personal he doesn't even want to say it. And if we're thinking about rappers that are strictly business, that are just talking about how many Bugattis they own or how many Versaces they have, that's not hurting them. But what he's saying, he's talking about his internal pain. So we're not innocent, we're hurting, and now I'm tired. Again, that's the main theme of this whole thing. Think of this guy sitting on his bed, looking out the window at the bricks. Nice upright sound, sounds kind of tired. The beat changes a little bit and extends, and then just one of the best verses on here. Never needed weapons in my palms, my arms was dangerous, Doing karate before we knew the potty, that's how they trained us, heinous. So karate before potty, meaning taught how to be violent before you could even take care of your own physical needs of going to the potty. Trained us, heinous. So many internal rhymes. Karate, potty, trained us, heinous. Arms, palms. Okay, so it's like, never needed weapons in my palms, my arms was dangerous. So internal rhyme, palms, arms, dangerous. And then karate, potty, internal, like palms and arms. And then they trained us, heinous. Beautiful. Still naming our babies after those crazies that maimed us. I assume this is referring to naming babies after genocidal white people, like my ancestors. No criminal wicked in my original lipid. We became this. Came to terms. Either die from germs or become tolerant. Y'all Koopa Troopas made us stupid, and now we're proud of it. This theme of education, Koopa Troopas, I assume is his term for oppressive white people. I mean, that's necessarily the whole thing. The whole thing is I don't think, the old stereotype of any kind of black militants is that the thesis is kill whitey. And it's not, I don't think. That's just what scared white people think, right? They can't hear anything else because they're too afraid. It's more about changing the power structure. It's more about equality. It's really more about class. Now, it happens to be that class in America has often been controlled through race, which makes it a racist question, which then makes it necessary to perhaps kill whitey. But that's not really what it is. The Koopa Troopas that are making people stupid are the people in power. Are the people who are instilling this sense of benign neglect. Now we're proud of it. Now here's where, again, there's this interesting thing where he is describing the conditions that led to African Americans having less and being less informed, this forced ignorance that he's describing, this bad education. And now we're proud of it. And then he takes ownership of it and points the finger of blame back at himself, back at the black community, right? I know, who am I to be talking about this? That's fine. You can call me a culture vulture in the comments. I totally understand that. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm a white guy from the suburbs of Boston. I was born and I was given so much by my birth, and I'm describing somebody who was born and who had so much taken away from his birth. I don't pretend to know what I'm talking about. I am a tourist. I know that. Okay? I'm describing this the way I would describe 17th century French literature, which is my other area of specialty. I'm not actually from 17th century France, okay? So, but it's interesting because he's taking ownership of it. He's pointing the finger back at himself and at his community, just like he did with We Are Not Innocent. Here, it's we are proud of it. We are proud of our own ignorance. And that's the problem that he's overcoming. He's trying not to be ignorant, but he's trying to figure out who his audience is. Hard to know Jah when all you know is jihad. Great wordplay there with different borrowed words from other languages. Jah comes from the Jamaican dialect, from Rastafarianism. That's what you call God. Jihad is the Arabic term, which means holy war. Jah, jihad. These words totally go together. They're from totally disparate cultures, but they somehow work. And then at the end of this verse, we hear someone talking. This is where it gets the most overtly political. It's some quote from somebody talking, I presume late 60s, early 70s, describing how they became militant. And they became militant and they became international, which is a code word for communist, because the struggle for class, the need for class unity transcends race and nationality, right? The forces in power want us to hate the other races and hate the other countries. Once Ka, the fireman, understands that his experience is no different than a fireman in Spain, right? Like once the garbage man in India understands that his plight is the same as the garbage man in Pakistan, they can overcome these kind of divisions that keep us down, right? So this whole international idea, and there's just a reading list. This person gives a reading list, to read W.B. Du Bois, to read Malcolm X, to read H. Rap Brown. I just want to make one more plea about this. This book is way more important to hip-hop than it's given credit. Gil Scott-Heron gets all the credit. He deserves a lot of credit. But as far as proto-rappers, H. Rap Brown, god damn, this book is amazing. This book really actually, if you are a Ka fan, I think if you read this, you'd feel a lot of resonance. He's a very complicated character. He changed his name. He's now dead, murdered by the police. Do you think the police were charged for that? Murdered by the police. Interesting, very interesting story, mentioning H. Rap Brown there. And so the most overtly political point. Then we get into the song Obstacles. The guitar is kind of whirling here. And then he sort of speaks in another voice, says, just get past your past, man. Wish I could. I wish it were that easy. You know what I mean. And this is where I'm going to tell you something. You, the viewer. The reason that you are fucked up is because of your childhood. Now, I don't swear on this channel. I don't, but I just did, and I'm going to do it again. I'm going to say that same sentence again. The reason that you are fucked up is because of your childhood. No one wants to hear it. Nobody wants to believe it. Everybody wants to believe their problems are unique and interesting and original. It couldn't possibly be the way that your parents treated you, or how your grandparents treated you, or how you felt worthless in school. But I have a spoiler for you. The spoiler is the research is in. And the reason you are fucked up is because of your upbringing. I went to therapy for 12 years. And every single time, now a wonderful therapist of mine who helped me get my brain straight, every time he would say, it's because of your upbringing, I would look at him and say, no, it's not. How dare you say that? I've got all these interesting problems. No, you're not that interesting. Your problems are common. It's because of your upbringing. And the thing that I love about this is that this is Ka just saying, I wish I could. I wish it were that easy. So if you think that you've gotten over the problems of your youth, without having to spend a lot of time and work overcoming them, they are controlling you right now. That's why you're drinking too much. That's why you're spending too much time watching YouTube videos. That's why you can't form good relationships. That's just, I don't know what to tell you. That's just the truth. And Ka is telling you, and now I'm telling you. Now, his difficulties are very different than my difficulties. Now, he makes it clear that his home life wasn't great, but he also had the societal difficulties. So I had difficulties at home, my family, whole situation. What's interesting here is he really emphasizes that this environment that he grew up in, the environment of benign neglect, is a lot of what created these problems. And again, he is, I mean, firemen are, I believe, very well paid. Working for New York State is great. They pay well. The benefits are great, Now, of course, the New York Post still soloed him out and got mad at him for having anti-police lyrics. So that's how entrenched racism is at the New York Post. That not even a New York firefighter can be a great hero before he is black. But, so he has, in theory, a good life. He has this secondary stream of income where he gets to be creative and people love him for it. And he gets to have a job where people love him for it. And he presumably gets like dental and health. But he can't get past his past. None of us can. Lack of possessions made me possessive. As far as talking about the worst, I may be the best. So he's bragging for one of the few times in this entire album about why he's the best at talking the worst. And lack of possessions made me possessive. That the lack that he grew up with dominates his worldview now. Streets couldn't compete with what I was facing at home. Speak to you man to man when I'm more of a zone. Why am I saying that he is a top MC? Okay. Why am I saying that Ka is a top MC? Okay. Like the S tier. All right. It's lines like this. Because on one hand, it's a funny, goofy lyric, right? Man to man versus zone in basketball, in football. I assume in other sports as well. You can have man-to-man defense where you're just assigned to one of the people and you follow that person around and make sure they don't score or don't do what they want to do. Or there's zone, where you just go to a general area of the play field, of the court, whatever, and you guard that zone. So he's speaking to us man to man, right? Like he's speaking into your ear and you're hearing him talk about his life, but he's more of a zone. Like, what does that even mean? It's like he's not actually trying to, like, it indicates a certain amount of like emotional remove or fear or vagueness. Like, I don't know what it means. I can't explain it precisely. But that's its poetic power. He's speaking as a zone. A zone is a very strange, there's actually a great poem by Guillaume Apollinaire from the early 20th century, French guy. Anyways, it's called Zone. And in that poem, he really emphasizes just the nature of this word zone. Like, it implies emptiness. It's like space, but like empty space, but also a loosely contained space. Top MC. Brownsville Ka is a top MC. This leads perfectly with this little electric guitar trick into the song Reap. Great kind of pull-off licks on the guitar. I hope they reap what they sow. Again, this appears to be about the people in power who oppress others. And then we have this quote, all oppressed people have a right to violence. Now, this reminded me of the Great Public Enemy interstitial bit. I think it's Flavor Flav saying, I got a right to be hostile. But actually, that's not what it's from. I looked it up. I figured it out, actually. Put on my little deerstalker cap and figured it out. This comes from a movie called Born in Flames by Lizzie Borden. If you are a leftist, do yourself a favor, watch the 1983 movie Born in Flames. The whole thing's available on YouTube. I watched a lot of it, not all of it. It's not a super easy watch, but it's wild. It's a fake documentary that takes place 10 years after a successful socialist revolution reformats all of America. Does that sound interesting to you? And it was filmed in 1983, like right as, really, the late stage capitalism, if we're living in late stage capitalism, if capitalism is like falling in on itself, there's a real good chance our entire society is going to fall under the weight of this extreme capitalism, right? I'm not trying to be a Marxist or whatever. It's just possible, right? I mean, communist countries fail under the weight of communism. There's a chance that we've gone too far, that we've done way too much. There's too much effing S on us, right? That's really possible. And really, the 80s is really where that started, where we start having the Reaganomics, the trickle-down Trickonomics, all that stuff, which makes sure that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And it's right there, 83, this movie was made. It's wild. It's interesting. Basically, in the future, it's like only blacks and lesbians who have any power. It's a really funny, interesting movie. So check it out. That's what Ka is telling you to do. He's telling you to watch this movie. Then we get to the song Count It Out, which is the only guest appearance on the album that I could hear. Chuck Stranger, kind of a funny line here where he talks about, I can get testy, real cojones, or have true cojones, testy, meaning like, kind of salty, but also like testy, like a testicle, and then cojones, which is Spanish for testicles, kind of funny. Very sparse and dark. Keeps on talking about Count It Out. I went from Count It Out to Count It On. Again, this is that image that we have of him floating down the river and, him making you float down the river and having these very simple wordplay choruses. Earlier, another song, he had this whole thing, I'm tired of being an underdog, I want to get over God. Like under, over, dog, and then God, which is dog backwards, like these sort of deep meanings. Like, this is a very deep thing. Went from count it out to count it on. This is going back to what actually matters in life. What actually matters in life is having people count on you. If nobody counts on you, your life is worthless. Like, the dream that we're sold, the capitalist dream, is a life of non-contingency, in which we are totally free to do whatever we want at all times, so we can just keep buying stuff and just being little free radicals, just whizzing through the universe like an electron, just, okay? That's the dream. But that's not what leads to happiness. What leads to happiness is human connections. It's having contingencies. It's living contingently. It's having my baby upstairs who needs me to make sure that when she throws up, someone cleans it up. It's having a wife who counts on me emotionally. It's having kids who count on me. It's having coworkers who count on me. It's having students who count on me. That's the value of life. And so he went from counted out, as in, okay, just another black kid from the inner city in New York, and he's just going to end up dead or in jail, because the benign neglect, oops, benign neglect, oops, did this keep happening? It's benign though. But he went from counted out to being counted on. Now he actually has true value, not exchange value, but true value, because people count on him. I love Ka. I'm so glad I came back to do this album. Thank you for the 3.5 thousand of you that watched the other one. Then we get to the song Eat. Cool kind of harps and flutes that appear at times here. There's a weird quote at the beginning, which I found the full quote, but I don't know where it's from. Was never right in the head after doing 5 long years, resisting the draft and refusing to go to Vietnam and join the Black Panther Party. He's got blood on his hands and skeletons hanging out to dry. He just mumbles now. I don't know who they're talking about here. That's the full quote. We only hear the last half of it here, but it very much places us in that space, in that 70s, 80s New York decrepitude. Throughout the prohibition of bars, I speak easy. That's the opening line. Very funny, because prohibition of bars meaning like a bar where you drink alcohol, or bars being things that you rap. Speaking easy means that he speaks easy. That's his style. But also during the prohibition, when alcohol was illegal, a speakeasy was the name of the bar. So throughout the prohibition of bars, I speak easy, raised from crude to engage in feud, not seek treaty. Going back again to the karate potty line, he's really insistent, very, very insistent. Very consistent, explaining the relationship between violence and poverty, like that the poor black youth, like he was when he was younger, and the people who he was surrounded by, were taught to be not feeling and violent, not to seek peace. That was the form of ignorance that was pushed on them. The meek need me, that's what he says. I like it. One of the poorest, too young to forage, need a couple quarters, eating cups of porridge. Great wordplay there. Some cops deplore us, surely won't make court if they caught us. Our color brown, so they try to cut us down if they saw us. Hey, New York Post. You suck. I know. That's what I came up with. That's not in my script. So many great lines. I mean, this whole album, there's just so many great lines. I was in a hole, you don't know the half, most likely to succeed. I was finished last. You know, my son just won the superlative in his high school, most likely to be president. It'd be pretty sweet. My son's awesome. So. There's like a beat change in here too. Just so much about desperation and hunger and fatigue. If I ain't bleed enough, this is another abrasion. Most roads to riches is a path to Satan. Just really going on again about this connection between wealth, between material wealth and moral failing. When I rap, some define as an omen, more shaman than showman. Just, again, this guy is on top of his game. And he's so damn subtle you can't tell. This weird kind of chorus, that's what we do. And it's funny because the previous... Whoops. Sorry. Wrong page. I'll get back to that point. I flipped over. Do it for my people, not for the amen, which is very important here because a lot of this album is about doing it for his people. And then he has even like a weird rhyme where someone says amen and then someone says hey man. Knock that off. Like amen, hey man. Then we get to the song The Block, flutes and guitar. Again, the flute's like basically doing a solo all the way through. This is the perfect drums for Ka. It's just a single ride cymbal on the one. He refers to himself as the Baron of the barren desert. More homonym play, which is words that sound the same but have different meanings. So Baron meaning like a feudal lord, and then barren as in empty. So he's the king of the rubble, like the great documentary Rubble Kings about the Bronx in the 70s. And then, you know, this another very kind of simple chorus where he's talking about the block, and he goes from the block to the building. So it's like he's trying to bring us in closer into his world, except it's not about a building. It's not about a building on a block. It's actually about him building something. That's all we do. It's this weird sample, building, because it's more important than talking about his building. He's not just talking about the misery that he grew up with. He is trying to figure out a way to get out of it. Typical mysterious quote at the beginning, just have to remember that medicine that works leaves a bitter taste. Some like cinematic strings and this great insane beat, like bird sounds, like backward sounds and strings. It's just beautiful. Tight curls is my only naps. It's a hair joke. Not a computer dude. No emails, only facts. Hominin play. Don't say my art's not mosaic. I sold the cracks. I sold the cracks? So the mosaic is when you like glue little pieces of tile usually together. So he's selling the cracks, the things in between the tiles. And he's not saying he sells crack. He's not one of those guys. He's not a crack rapper. Beautiful. Slow flow but fascinating. What they show the masses is emasculating and cut from the same cloth if you fabricating. A whole big theme of this album is him being the truth teller and other rappers just selling fabrications, right? Selling fake things. And that this is the fantasy that is being sold is fake and is in the interest of the ruling class. This is where we get to the line I just quoted that's very good. Most road to riches is a path to Satan. So really this album's not very preachy. He's not very preachy. It sounds preachy the way I say it. That, if you're rapping about money, you're just on the road to Satan and you're just being co-opted by the power structures that put us in this place in the first place. But he's able to do it cool. More shaman than showman. I already talked about that. Then the final song is My Only Home, which opens up with, I believe, someone singing the refrain, Black is Beautiful. This was an expression, I believe, in the early 70s, not the 60s. So sort of, again, in that kind of militant range. Flute and guitar whisper again. Flutes, guitars. It's interesting because, this whole idea of like home, like he's talking about his home being like Brownsville and the ghetto. I also think it might be in reference to his skin as well. Just like it's his only home. It's all he has, A very political verse about the assassination of black leaders. There's a lot of assassinated black leaders that we could talk about. He doesn't mention H. Rap Brown, but it's a different story. He talks Malcolm, Martin. They was focusing the scope as soon as the lecturing was starting. So the image of like a black civil rights speaker talking and them focusing the scope, even just focusing scope. Great rhyming. You invested to leave a mark, they invested in marksmen. Rare breed, 400-year lead. It's the most useful way to think about, I think, the inequality in America by really understanding that concept of a 400-year lead. It's always the question of when does history start? So a race is actually a good way to think about it. Because, why did I become a professor of French and live in a beautiful home? And why did, growing up in suburban Massachusetts, suburban Boston, whereas maybe some kid from Roxbury, more downtrodden place, why did that happen that way? There's redlining, concentrated poverty in Roxbury. My grandfather grew up in Roxbury, big mansion, but we all moved out of Roxbury. My family moved, white flight, got out of the city, moved to the suburbs. So. Why didn't they move? Well, because they weren't allowed to buy property at that point. So where does history start? So some guy who was born the same year that I was born in Roxbury didn't make it to the same level of education and success that I had. But he grew up in the 80s. Just even then, just in our lifetime, the inequality is so great that it is ridiculous how impossible it was from infancy. That's a line from this album. But then just go back to the fact that his grandfather couldn't even own property, while my grandfather owned a mansion in Roxbury. And then his great-great-grandfather was a slave. One of my great-great-grandfathers owned a slave. Multiple slaves. I don't like saying that. That sucks. It's terrible. I hate it. I hate saying that. But it's true. What am I going to do? Pretend like it's not true? Well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to keep talking about this race and keep saying, everyone pull yourselves up by the bootstraps, but there's no boots. Only I got the boots. They gave me boots. They gave me rocket boots. I don't even need straps. Okay? Anyways, rare breed, 400-year lead. So if we go back 400 years, the mechanisms for cultivating wealth and education have been in my favor nonstop. I say F this place, but it's my only home. And that's what he keeps saying. You know, like he wants to burn it down, but it's his only home. This is also the only real time on this album where I hear his great De Niro exhale through his nose. Pay attention, you know. It's just kind of a neat trick. No one else does it. Now, hopefully the audio worked here. These are my Patreons. Those are my eyebrows. All hail my eyebrows. They give me money, and I actually bought the last album because it wasn't streaming at that point. So I bought the album on MP3, even though I don't even listen to MP3s, so I could review it. So thanks to these folks for that. And please listen to Ka, because his music is great. Because he's a top-tier MC. Now, please, may this audio work. I'm so scared.